And now I'm going to hand over to Yasar from ICF, who is going to take us through a session looking at policy, something we've already touched on in a UK perspective, but he's going to give us a look at how it's looking for the long term. So Yasar, over to you.
Hi everyone, nice to be here. Good morning, then. So I guess we'll be discussing probably the hottest topic, I guess, the policy, which has been evolving always. So we have policies, we have mandates already, and they also introduce some level of new uncertainties, let's say. But what we'll discuss today is sort of how we can actually continue evolving policies, what sort of new policies are needed. So we'll take it from where are we today, how did we arrive here, from different jurisdictions perspective, and also from a financier's perspective. And then we'll discuss what is next, how policies should continue evolving. So we have Roberto from EBRD, he's a principal banker there. We have Kevin Welsh from Airlines for America, VP of Environment. We have Jonathon Counsell, IAG, no need to introduce. And we have Anna from Boeing, UK Sustainability Lead. So maybe what we can do, maybe we can start quickly with sort of, Anna, with you in terms of setting the context, because you do quite a lot of SAF work all over the world. And before we dive into UK, US jurisdictions, or I know EBRD is doing quite a lot of work literally all over the world, like within the countries that they are involved in. Can you give us a little bit of context around what's going on in the world? How has been your involvement? What has been you have been observing in terms of SAF scale-up?
Sure. Let's try this one. There we go, sure. Well, thanks very much for having me here in the first place. I guess we'll zoom out a little bit. We've had some really deep conversations just now, but we'll zoom out and really start with aviation, as in overall aerospace is an economic contributor, massive one, 4% of GDP globally. It has massive societal benefits, so we know in terms of connecting with people, providing humanitarian relief, national security. So all of these are key bits that will impact our society. We also know 86 million jobs in 2024 were directly impacted to aerospace, as well as 8 trillion goods were exchanged across countries. So the massive economic contributor is there, but we also know there's a 2.5% figure to our emissions that the aviation industry emits, and that's where we need to target. We know that by 2050 we're expected to see passengers double growth from 4.4 billion this 2024 to almost double by 2050. That also means it's likely, as we see other industries and sectors decarbonize, it's likely to see aviation go on the plus side, and that's what we want to avoid. So for us, it's about responsible growth, and I think everybody in this room would agree that we want to, continue growing as a market, but in a sustainable way. So that's how I'll set the scene. Ultimately, it's also because it's the right thing to do, and we know it by now. Then we'll walk over towards the levers of decarbonization. I think we've all established more or less which ones they are. And industry is kind of aligned here, but we need to, I guess from a Boeing perspective, prioritizing emissions reductions and fuel efficiencies, that's where we want to target. So we've identified SAF as the main lever of decarbonization for us in terms of reducing the emissions, and that's where we've been focusing most of our attention. IATA expects 65% of decarbonization to come from SAF, and that's where Boeing has been putting most of their investment in. I guess we'll start with also looking at the current SAF demand. So currently it's being dominated by mandates in Europe and in the UK, so we've seen quite a lot of movement here. But we've seen in this last year quite a lot of countries such as Japan, Malaysia, India, British Columbia, and Indonesia have developed proposals for SAF uptake in their regions. So although they're not mandates yet, we're seeing this movement towards. We've also had the interesting point from Singapore Levy, which has raised eyebrows, but also has been quite positively seen in Southeast Asia, and quite a few countries are looking at this as a way of potentially introducing this sort of policy. So I guess I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, perfect. I think you already explained it very well. And one of the things you mentioned, the socio-economic benefits. So that's very fundamental. Aviation's contribution to the world, and this probably links very well with the policy aspect, because the governments have direct benefit in sort of supporting the SAF scale up. And UK has been at the very forefront of this, actually, Jonathon, right? So can you tell us a little bit of the historical activity, where we are today, before we dive into all the details of RCM and everything?
Sure. And thank you for the invitation. Great to be here. And thank you for the 2 awards as well. That was a real surprise. And I'm glad Jim was here, Jim Davis, because that's really an award for his team, because he does all the work. So well done. So, where are we? I think, UK, I stand back, we're in a pretty good place. This has been a journey for us. We started on this as about 2010, wasn't it? So 15-year journey. I never forget, and actually it's almost 15 years ago to this month, we had a meeting with the UK Aviation Minister. We were progressing a SAF project at the time, and his response, "This is brilliant, we'll get right on it." So anyway, good signal to start with. We got the first policy move about 2017. It was inclusion within the Renewable Transport Fuel Obligation, which is okay to provide some benefits, but nowhere near a strong enough signal to invest in SAF plants. The big next move was the Jet Zero Council, which happy to talk to anyone about that. I think that overall has been a really big success. That was an industry-government partnership at the highest level, CEOs of all the major companies and Secretaries of State for Transport of the Energy Ministry and Transport. That really turbocharged, in, if I can say that term, in terms of policy moves. And that's been the driver behind getting the mandate. And we've always been absolutely clear, mandate important, but not sufficient. You need to complement it with incentives, so the revenue certainty mechanism. So I think we're in a good place, still much to do. So just a couple of points I would make. On the mandate, does the UK mandate, as has been talked about extensively over the last couple of days, quite different to the EU mandate because it has a heifer cap. And we support that. It makes sense. UK is never going to be a big producer of 1G SAF. We just don't have the feedstocks. So therefore, they need to send a strong signal that we're looking to invest in 2G SAF. And it's quite, when you look at the numbers, I just trying to work out what the volumes. By 2030, we're going to need 350,000 tons of 2G SAF. Bearing in mind there's not a lot today. We've got to get moving. By 2035, that goes to 800,000 tons. By 2040, over 2 million tons of 2G SAF, and that's why that's why we're very much focused on helping develop that market. Revenue certainty mechanism. I would say it's a shame. We were saying as an industry back in 2020, we'll need something to complement the mandate. It took the government 2 or 3 years to get there. They now recognise it's in the King's Speech. They're going to deliver it. It's not until the back end of next year. Couple of key issues within that, though. One is the scope. It should only focus, as Jim mentioned earlier, on those plants that make economic sense and can produce low-cost SAF here in the UK. We shouldn't be producing SAF in the UK for the sake of it. It has to be an economic case. The other one is funding. So, we talk about polluter pays, but we can't have polluter penalised. And I think, we accept that we're going to have to pay for the SAF as airlines, and that's going to be a big bill. You think by 10% mandate by 2030, it's 1.2 million tonnes. At the current premiums, you're looking at over $3 billion that the airlines will be paying for the mandate. So our view is we shouldn't be paying to de-risk fuel infrastructure either. Our preference, though, is we use revenues from the UK emissions trading scheme that are provided by airlines to pay for that mechanism, which is what it's designed for, and was exactly what happens in the EU. So we're only asking for, what was the original principle. And just final point, we talked about the government announced they're going to try and link the EU and the UK ETS. We think that'll be that opportunity. Let's get the good bits as well as the bad bits. Recycling ETS revenues is one of them, and also let's have some SAF allowances, as happens in the EU as well.
Yeah, you mentioned about the heifer cap, which I agree is one of the probably the biggest differentiators in the UK policy, right? Like Jonathon, it has been very successful in attracting like 2G investments, but then we also do know, UK is not likely to maybe meet 10% without imports, right? How do you see the role of imports maybe in sort of complementing this transition?
Critical. And I think the UK government recognised this. I think in their last consultation document, they said certainly for the first 2 or 3 years, they expect at least 50% of that 2G to be imported. And we support that. As I say, we shouldn't just be making it here because of the broader economic benefits of jobs and so on. It's got to be done for the right reasons. So flexibility around imports is critical.
Perfect. Because the reason I ask this, I know EBRD is engaging with quite a lot of stakeholders, and there are cases in which they are exploring importing SAF to the mandated jurisdictions, right? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your work in other parts of the world, like non-mandated parts of the world, maybe.
Yeah, so as I explained yesterday, we cover a wide geographical part of the world. So we have 43 countries now. And so some of them fall under the EU mandates. So that is straightforward, you know what to do. Some of them not. So for instance, yesterday was mentioned that LanzaJet is exploring a project in Kazakhstan. So that project originated by EBRD. So EBRD invested in the IPO of Air Astana. As part of our Paris alignment mandate, we need to invest in companies that have a clear decarbonization strategy. So based on that, Air Astana committed to some SAF targets. In parallel, we were working on the decarbonization of Gas Munagas, the national oil and gas company. So we just connected the dots. And we started to develop a SAF project in the country. So we work in all the different pathways, and surprisingly, the best pathway was alcohol to jet. And now they're moving on the next phases, as explained yesterday. So that is a way where there is no policy, is a way for us to drive that SAF demand, that investment, and is part of our green mandate. Then we operate in other locations that are nearby Europe, in which import into Europe makes sense because you get the premium and that supports the vast majority of the project when they have a local feedstock. So for instance, we're exploring a project in Egypt. They have a high abundance of used cooking oil. So the idea is to maximize the local use of cooking oil and then use SAF in the country, but while the demand in the country is kicking off, so you can export to Europe.
Yeah, and I think this is a great example of how one policy in one part of the world can actually influence the activity in other parts of the world, which we have also seen similar dynamics in the States, right? So Kevin, for you, if you are talking about, of course, SAF policies, we have to talk about the carrots and sticks, and the carrots example, let's say. So how the federal or state level policies has been effective in terms of scaling up or attracting investment to states?
Yeah, thank you very much. Great to be here. Good morning, everyone. Kevin Welsh. I'm with Airlines for America. We represent 10 U.S. airlines and Air Canada in Washington, D.C., and we have for many decades, basically as long as the commercial aviation industry has existed in the U.S. And this is a journey we've been on for a while. So actually, Jonathan mentioned the public-private partnership here in the UK, which has been instrumental. In the US, it began in 2006 under the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative. I personally have been working on this since 2008, so not that long after. One of the things that we've seen, right, and I think your colleague showed a slide yesterday that was really helpful, is we've seen this dramatic uptick in production of SAF over the last few years. But there was a lot of work happening in the 15 years leading up to it. So the US Federal Aviation Administration funded the work on most of the ASTM SAF pathways that exist to have safe drop-in fuels, right? Without the work that was funded by the US government in SAF, we wouldn't be able to have the SAF today around the world. So that's just one example. There's a ton of work that's happened over many years. And so that's really important. Where are we in the US? So again, some of these numbers were shown yesterday, and I had to use the ATAG maintains on its website a calculator to convert between gallons and tons, because I would tell you gallons, and that might be useless to most people in the room. So last year in 2024, there were over 120,000 metric tons produced in the US. And that's up from, in 2021, about 15,000 metric tons, right? So we saw an 8-fold increase in the first 4 years, US production. This year through April, we've already exceeded last year's production in the US. So what we've seen is, just even in the last 6 months, a number of facilities come online with new production. So we're seeing a consistent ramp up. It's not as much as we, as the airlines, would like to see, but it's moving in the right direction. So that's really important. I'm going to get into the 45Z in a bit when we have a further discussion, but I just want to highlight two additional points. One is the multiple levers, and Anna mentioned this. We really are focused as airlines on decarbonizing the journey, right? Technology is an important role, operational efficiency, SAF. One of the challenges with technology is the backlog of current deliveries. Just last year in the US Airlines did not receive half of the aircraft that they had contractually obligated with the manufacturers. So the aircraft are coming, but at a slower rate. And in fact, globally, the average age of the fleet over the last 20 years keeps going up. It's nearly 16 years old on average age. And so that, while technology plays a really important role, it's not moving at the pace it needs to. And so SAF, as a drop-in hydrocarbon replacement, is the place where we really need to focus our energy to do the decarbonization. I think we all know this, but it's important to refocus. People wonder, well, why are you so focused on SAF? Well, because if we're going to make a difference, we've got to do that. Then the last point I would make just now, and it's funny listening to Gene, and of course, we bump into each other at these conferences. We were at a conference last week, so maybe it's just hearing him talk, and I'll think the same way. I was going to say, on policy, it's important to have consistent, durable, and sufficient policy. That's what we airlines want. But the reality, as we know it is, the world is far from perfect, right? It's not a carrot or a stick. The carrot in the US, we'll talk about it a little bit, it's not that great. It's got a lot of flaws. Jimmy Samartz has talked about how it's not even going to help LanzaJet because of the sort of nuances with how ethanol will get credit, but not necessarily alcohol to jet. So the policy landscape is very difficult. I fully agree with Gene that it's uncertain, it's unpredictable. So what we see our role doing in the US is the art of the possible, right? So the 45Z is the art of the possible right now in the US. You have mandates here in Europe. You have other, Singapore has announced something interesting, but they haven't implemented it yet, right? So we don't actually know if the Singapore thing is going to launch. Interesting idea. We haven't seen it in action. So we're in a policy laboratory, lots of experiments going on. The last thing I would say is where the industry can lead on this, and it's what Gene mentioned, it's on interoperable registries, right? We need transparency, we need credibility in the sustainability, and we need verification. And those are all things that industry can actually lead. So it's actually in our control to have the consistency we need around the world, while also recognizing that we have a laboratory going on with policy right now.
Yeah, and which I really enjoyed this metaphor. And one of the experiments is run by the UK government, I guess, Jonathon, right? Like, not an experiment, like it's a well-proven concept, let's say, the revenue certainty mechanism. But now, of course, they are working on deepening that and adapting for sustainable aviation fuel. So how do you see, like, where are we today with the RCM implementation? How do you see it's going to actually support the SAF scale-up in the UK?
Yeah, no. Hello. No, we see it as absolutely critical. Maybe what I can do is also talk about the role of airlines, where we are as IAG, targets we've set, and then where we see the revenue certainty mechanism fitting in. So, we like everybody else, we see SAF as absolutely critical to enabling us to meet our decarbonisation targets. It's the only thing that's going to move the dial in the next 10 years, and it is the only viable solution for long haul, which is 70% of our emissions. So we set the target back in April 2021, 10% SAF by 2030. So for us, that's 1 million tonnes a year. Global supply at the time was 100,000 tonnes. So tumbleweed moment in our board meeting, we're saying, you want to commit to 10 times global supply? Are you sure? so it's like, and why we were confident is because the momentum we saw, particularly how around regulatory frameworks, particularly the EU and the UK mandates, and also the UK government was starting to think about the revenue certainty mechanism. But for us, it wasn't just we encouraged a lot of other airlines to also make that commitment, particularly One World. So One World followed a year later, and that's 20% of global capacity. Today there are 60 airlines. committed 10% by 2030, 40% of global capacity. And the reason we're doing that is we are signaling to regulators that we see this as a critical element of our pathway, therefore implement policy. So that I think has been very helpful. I get a lot of questions. Where are we? We're very confident we'll hit the 10%. We've already got committed contracts of 40% of it. Jim mentioned a $3.5 billion commitment. That's all those long-term offtake agreements that we've got. The majority will be 1G, but as I say, our focus is very much on the 2 and the 3G. This is the area where we see there will be supply challenges. Because there is none today, and those mandates are going to come and hit us quickly. So, the role that we're playing, we will invest in companies. We mentioned Speedbird this morning. We will invest where we need to, but the primary role that we play is committed long-term take-or-pay contracts. And they're hard for us. This is a new world for airlines. We do 1-year deal, jet fuel, 1-year spot deals. We don't do, with 12, it was a 14-year deal. With Infinium, it's a 10-year deal. That was pain for us to get that through our internal governance, because a lot can happen in 14 years. We're very happy to share with any other airline, learn the lessons that we went through. How do we manage to convince our board this is the right thing to do? One of the critical elements of that was a very detailed and robust risk analysis, because when you're committing to something for 14 years, you want to know what the potential downsides are. And so just one example of that is one of the extended conversations we always have is around, policy certainty and mandates. What if the mandates change? My personal view, I don't think they will. They've never changed in biodiesel markets and so on, not at the top level. There's an issue around, I guess, the PTL sub-targets in Europe, and there's things we can do to mitigate some of the risks there. But make sure that you protect yourself contractually if there are material changes in policy. So that's one of the things that, and also with the revenue certainty mechanism. But as I say, I think we really want to encourage, we can't do it on our own, all airlines. The key role that you play is these long-term take-or-pay contracts.
Yes, and I guess, Roberto, we were in Amsterdam, as you remember, and the commission was there as well in another event, and they were trying to reassure everyone that the mandates will not be removed, or they are here to stay for the long term. This is for sure as well. So I think there has been quite a lot of discussion around this in other discussions in other events as well. So in terms of, Jonathan, you mentioned about the role of airlines through like take or pay, for example, offtake agreements to sort of de-risk these facilities. And I know Boeing also has been investing in quite a lot of SAF facilities, engaging in scaling up SAF in general, maybe through roadmaps and everything as well. So can you tell us a bit more about what do you do in terms of sort of de-risking SAF investment all over the world?
Sure. So there's a few areas. I guess I'll start with the feedstock assessments, because we've worked on a few activities. First of all, Boeing is not an airline. We're an aircraft manufacturer, and yes, we have some late orders that you've mentioned. But we've been working with fuel for the full time of our existence, right? So there's a lot of very, very smart people in the team that really understand fuel. So there's been a lot of work internally, just really understanding feedstocks, assessing feedstocks, but equally working closely with academia to really understand, where are the gaps and where can we support either through technical testing or through any other inputs that they require. You've mentioned the feedstock assessment and roadmaps, Yasar, and this is an area where we've been working closely with national bodies, research centers, as well as their key airlines in countries. And I'm thinking all across the world, all the way from Southeast Asia to the Middle East to here in Europe. So that's been an area where we've worked quite closely with local providers to allow for SAF global uptake, really. So that's been kind of one area. The other area is a lot of partnerships with SAF producers here, myself here in the UK and the Nordics, but scattered across the globe as we've got a regional team. And that's really been about identifying key SAF producers and seeing how we can support the SAF scale-up. So in my case, I've been personally involved with our partnership and investment with Firefly, Norski Fuel, Wagner Sustainable Fuels. I think they're around here as well. So it's nice to see some familiar faces. And that's been about acknowledging that they are in the most difficult stage of growth within the company and supporting through small SAF uptakes. Then I guess, as someone mentioned earlier, corporates and SAF uptake. I guess for us, we've done a 64.5 million liters prepaid agreements to have SAF. That roughly accounts for 20% of our own fuel use. So that might not mean much to the airlines, but for us, it's still a significant. And I think it's worth mentioning that it is a demand signal into the markets, and I do think this is the bit where corporates also play.
Perfect, thank you. And Jonathon, I know you both mentioned about sort of de-risking, supporting the de-risking of SAF scale-up, let's say, through various mechanisms. We start receiving some questions. So maybe, Roberto, maybe can you tell us a bit more about, from a finances perspective, how do you see this de-risking element working for you? How do you assess the risk in projects? And I guess there's a specific question, maybe we can link to this as well, is in SAF financing in Africa, for example, or financing SAF in difficult parts of the world, maybe in terms of the capital cost.
Sure. So, I mean, the risk in the project, I think the projects we talked yesterday about bankability, and so you need to have the feedstock supply, the technology, and then the risk, and then the offtake. So if we move to Africa, what is amazing about Africa is the amount of bio-based feedstock available. The issue there is to comply with the regulations and the list of the EU, the RED III directive, but you can comply easily with CORSIA. So that is what we're looking at, some projects over there that will target local but also exports market. The biggest risk in emerging markets that I see is not on the feedstock supply or the offtake or even the technology, but it's in the project developers and operators. So what we see is a lot of investors going for these facilities to try to develop SAF production plants. So I'm a chemical engineer. I used to go work in refining. I have worked in solar and wind, so I can see that happening with OEMs. I cannot see that happening with a SAF facility. So it's a small refinery. You need to have the capabilities to operate that facility. And that is a risk that sometimes is missed. So for us, that is key in emerging markets, is to have a strong team that can operate those facilities. And they were mentioning that when you have a Shell or a Suncor behind, that gives you some reassurance. So it is the same for us.
Perfect, thank you. And Kevin, there's a question for you, but before that, because it's linked to incentives as well. So can you tell us a little bit about the details of the One Big Beautiful Act, maybe the 45Z extension? What does it cover? And then maybe if you would like to take the question as well after that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I mean, I see this question, which is a great question. I see another question, which is good. So I'll try to answer a couple. But let me start with a question and then get into the incentive. I mean, number one, yes, the airlines are focused on decarbonization. They, have committed goals, just like other companies, right? And people can question, how sincere any particular company is, but these are public companies. They put these commitments out there and they stand behind them. Number two, unfortunately, the SAF incentives do not bring SAF to price parity. So that would be great. That's actually not true. And that's where I was going to talk about 45Z. When it first went into effect, I worked in the government, and I thought it was fantastic, right? The first time to have the SAF credit. Now I'm on the industry side. I still think it's fantastic, although it's amazing how quickly the industry went from championing the credit to pointing out all of its flaws. It's just kind of fascinating how that happens, right? We pocketed the success and then we looked at the flaws. But the reality is, it was the art of the possible. It's a major surprise, but it reflects a lot of hard work and a lot of advocacy behind the scenes that the Clean Fuel Production Credit, 45Z, is in the House of Representatives, quote unquote, big beautiful bill. It's not done. The legislative process this year has a long way to go. So we will do everything to keep the focus on that and keep that in there, but it's not done, and we hope that it will be there. But it's a change. There was a blender's tax credit for the first 2 years that provided $1.25 per gallon of fuel, and that could be increased for each point of CI reduction. the 45Z credit starts at 0. So you have a 50% CI reduction, you get nothing. Each point of CI reduction you get beyond that, you get a penny. So the value of 45Z is much, much lower. It's still something, but it is not sort of what's needed. So when people are lauding carrots, this isn't the best carrot. Like, you know, it's an okay carrot. It's better than no carrot, but it's not the best. So that's one. But of course, we're incredibly grateful that it's potentially going to still be there because it's important to drive the market. But then turning to Europe, I was going to go to this question. I think the acronym is Sustainable Transport Investment Plan. I don't have a lot of high hopes for it personally. They should be taking seriously the issues that are going on with refuel. Airlines are paying a lot for mandated SAF. There are competition issues in terms of the availability of SAF. The flexibility mechanism as written in the law does not work the way it's written in the law. It's on a country basis. And so airlines, they can't go out on the market and get SAF. They have to negotiate with the supplier at that particular airport. And the amount, the 2% that's being looked at is not across union airports as written in the directive. It's actually across the airports in that country where that particular supplier provides fuel. So my hope for the STIP would be that they take some of these issues seriously and work on addressing those. I don't have a lot of high expectations for that. And then one last thing, which is on this sub-mandate for PTL, and maybe this kind of shows why mandates can be problematic, or if they're not paired with effective other tools to actually mature the technologies in the industries. People are saying, well, they need to hold the PTL mandate in place, or maybe it will happen, but the reality is that could be pretty disastrous economically across the board, because you need, in 2030, I think something around 5 e-fuel plants functional in Europe. And right now, you know, maybe there'll be 1 or 2 that are actually producing fuel in 2030 if all goes according to plan. So right now, without the additional sort of incentives and tools in place, this 1.2% sub-mandate in Refuel EU is not actually doing what's needed to get e-fuel to market.
Exactly. I think this is a great wrap-up maybe for the discussion as well, because this, I guess, to me, explains how policy should continue evolving. The 1.2% sounds great, but it's not enough, apparently. So that's why we have been having quite a lot of discussion about the STIP, which is likely to support eSAF facilities. Anyone would like to take Jonathon would like to tell more about STIP, or Roberto, or
I think that there is
so much uncertainty.
There is a revision of the refuel coming, no, in 2027. Yeah. So there may be some carrots or something to help there.
Yeah, likewise. We definitely. I mean, in theory, there have been funds available through the Innovation Fund, Horizon Fund for SAF projects, but nothing's been awarded materially because it's very difficult to compete on a value for carbon basis with all other sectors. So therefore, the principle's right. We need to somehow ring fence and protect funds to support SAF projects. Mandates on their own, as we said, won't do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there has been some talk about an H2 global type of mechanism for SAF. That could be great. We have seen that in other sectors, in ammonia. So one of our projects won the auction for H2 Global and has been very helpful for the project.
Perfect, thank you. I think we have a question about the imports to the UK, like whether there'll be any restrictions to that. Jonathon, would you like to?
I hope not. I think the UK, particularly when it comes to 1G SAF, they're recognising that you're not going to get massive production here, so you've got to be flexible on imports. So most of that 1G requirement will be imported. I think where they will look at is on sustainability conditions, so making sure that all that imported 1G SAF meets robust sustainability conditions. But yeah, I don't think they'll go down the tariff route.
Yeah, and what is the share of SAF that is imported from Asia in your portfolio currently, like in your upstream?
I'll look to Jim there, but I think 162,000 tons, possibly a third from Asia. What was that? Yeah, I'll get the nod.
Yeah. Is it? Yeah. So. Cool, perfect. I see that we have a minute left, and I don't think there are any other new questions. So maybe we can just get to closing remarks. Like if there is anything, maybe Roberto, starting from you would like to share anything in terms of like how would you like policy to evolve? for you to invest in more SAF facilities, hopefully, maybe.
Yeah, so I think that for us is predictive. I mean, like being sure that the policy will remain or being more ambitious. So I know that we will have discussed about agility and all this stuff, but for banks like us, that is not what we need. So to convince our credit risk officers, we need to be sure that the policy will stay and at least will remain as it is.
Kevin?
Yeah, well, maybe just to, the thing I would leave folks with is this point about what can be made consistent, and that's around SAF accounting. And one thing that's always puzzled me is that when we talk about SAF, we're relying on upstream accounting to show the carbon reductions. So if we're able to sort of follow that logically, then we should also be perfectly willing to book and claim, right? Because at the end of the day, the blended SAF looks just like a regular hydrocarbon, and we're using an accounting system to show the carbon reduction benefits for that gallon of SAF. We're not, the physical properties when it's put in the airplane don't matter. So it's essential that the book and claim SAF accounting go along with it, and I think that the industry really does have the power collectively to drive that, to drive the interoperable registries, and to drive the global accounting process.
Perfect, thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, and just focusing on the UK, let's just get that revenue certainty mechanism implemented as quickly as possible, a targeted scope around those projects that can deliver cost-effective SAF and funded by Aviation UK ETS revenues. And early signs of this harmonisation, that sends some optimism. More of that, the better.
Perfect, thank you. And Anna?
And for us is to continue, I guess, supporting our customers, but really developing and continue working with ICAO on international global frameworks that are standard, easy and transparent, so that we can that everybody can get involved and avoid any sort of distortion across the market.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you very much all. Thank you everyone for listening in, and have a nice day.
Thank you.